have a seat.
Well, good morning, Lifehouse.
Good morning.
How are you guys?
Good.
Wasn't that song so awesome? I was telling first service, I remember being a little kid in a little Baptist church that I grew up in, and we'd get to that song, that part of it was, "Oh, precious." I used to sing that out so loud, but apparently it was always in the wrong time, because the band always decided to get quiet for that part. And so here's this child singing completely out of tune, extremely loud. So anyways, I love that song. It just brings back great memories. It's really good to be here with you guys this morning. Riley, I'm going to follow the rules this time. Riley's been telling me this forever, which is I need to introduce myself. Hi. My name is Dan McGarr. My family and I have been coming here for a few years now, and I've been given the honor of being able just to come every once in a while and bring God's Word. And so today we are continuing our journey through the book of Revelations. All right, so go ahead. No, I'm not gonna do that today. Acts chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. As many of you know, we are in the thick of NFL playoff season. Yes, there are some excited people in this room, okay? And as you know, there comes a lot of passion with football. And growing up in a family that loved football, it always made things really exciting this time of year. You see, both my parents loved football, and I mean loved football. But there was a bit of an issue. I'm going to just get all the issues out now, okay? See, the issue was that even though my parents loved football, they hated each other's teams. And like that, I'm not talking just a little bit. I mean, my stepdad was this die-hard Niners fan, and my mom loved the Raiders. And so obviously we have some contention here too. Woo! And I feel like y'all sat on the separate side of the room. That's kind of strange how that happened. You see, so it made football games really interesting because both my parents are super passionate. And so especially when there were moments where there were bad calls, I heard things that I probably shouldn't have heard. And I saw things that got thrown at the television. I never realized you can be mad at something that doesn't have feelings, but my parents were. What was so interesting, though, about this is growing up and watching to see how the game changed. Now, it hasn't really changed all too much. I mean, I think we can all agree that, for the most part, refs always get the calls right. Okay, that, I don't know why we're laughing, that there are never errors, that there are never moments where you're looking at a ref wondering, you must be watching a different game, let alone a different sport. That doesn't ever happen, right? Okay, well, I guess it does. But back in 1999, some things changed because teams were now able to review plays. They were able to challenge. So if there was a call that they didn't like, something that they thought was an error, something where they thought was unfair or not right, a team could throw out the challenge flag and have that played reviewed. Now, technology has made that crazy because now you have 4,762 views of one single play. So you would think it would make it more accurate, right? Some of you, the armchair referees in the room, know that that's not true. You see, we get so caught up in what the right call is. We get so caught up in, come on, it should have been this way. And we may have known better, and maybe we're right. But I think we're losing the point of all of this. At the end of the day, what's so incredible about these innovations in that game is not necessarily the outcome. It's the ability that we have, the right that we have for a team to challenge, to dispute, to appeal. You see, for some of us, when it comes to injustice, when it comes to the struggles that we have, hate, personal struggle, suffering, we waver on this line. It's this fine line of, am I supposed to just turn the other cheek, wait for God to move and fulfill his promises, or am I supposed to live in my God-given ability to stand up for what's right, for the truth, for the rights of others, for justice, and be a voice for those who may not have one? See, are we called to be still and wait? while also being called and given the ability to move and take action? The answer is yeah, both. You see, at the end of the day, what our job is to, yes, follow Jesus, but following requires action. So let's go ahead and we're going to get into this morning's passage. So again, Acts chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. We're going to break it down and stop along the way. So where we're at in Acts, we now have a new successor. We get to meet Festus. He's now taken over duties from Felix. Paul is still where? Prison. Seems like he's just been there the whole time, right? And he's been left there for a few years by Felix, who decided, I'm just going to leave you here because it'll appease the Jewish leaders that are bugging me. Poor Paul. But then what we realize, though, is if we were to just take a harsh look at this situation, did those Jewish leaders, did they really want Paul in prison? What do they want? Dead. Dead. Think about that pressure. Think about being Paul. And you're in this place where you know you didn't do anything, yet that's what people are after. They don't want you in jail. They want you dead. And that's where we are right now this morning. So we're going to start with Acts chapter 25, verses 1 through 5. Let's get to it. Now, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem. Get this, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. Okay, so what we come to know about Festus really quickly is that at first light, he tends to be more of an upright ruler than Felix. You see, Festus wasn't afraid just immediately just get in the thick of it and take action. I mean, look at what his first thing was. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to see what's going on there, right? You see, he had barely arrived in the capital before these Jewish leaders decide to, hey, look what we want to talk to you about. Here's this situation going on. We need you to deal with Paul. And they begged that he be brought to Jerusalem to be tried. Now, we know the definition of insanity, right? To do the same thing over and over and over again and expect what? Okay, so you guys know what we just read. So the Jewish leaders decided to dust off their old plan to try and get Paul to go to Jerusalem so they could kill him on the way. Did it work the first time? It didn't. And you see, Festus was smart, right? He knew how to play politics. He was in that role for a reason. He wasn't going to just let a bunch of Jewish leaders decide for him and tell him what to do. So he offered for them to go to Caesarea and present their case against Paul there. See, there's an important takeaway here. There's all of this stuff going on in the background with Paul that a lot of this time he just kind of sat there and chose to do nothing. At some points he sat silent. He took advantage of the opportunity of what God was doing through him in those moments. However, you see, I think it's important for us to understand that when it comes to justice, when it comes to our trials, when it comes to accusations or sin that is bearing down on us, I think there's a point we have to understand, and this is gonna pain you to hear. It's gonna pain me to say, but life isn't fair. Wow, you guys groaned on that one. Seriously, when I actually was writing that, I got chills. Not the good chills. Like the kind of chills when you eat something that just doesn't taste good and you're like, ugh, yeah, gross, right? I immediately thought back to my childhood because that was the first time I heard it. And then I heard it for 1,000,000 times, at least my first 5 years of life, right? And it brought me back to this moment where I remember opening my lunch from school. And I started taking all of my stuff out. And you know the lunchroom comparisons that happen. You all did it. You take out your stuff and look what everybody else has. And so I took out my bag of Hydrox cookies. Some of you laughed because you must have experienced them. Let me tell you about Hydrox cookies. These things are imposters of Oreos. Now, somebody from First Service reminded me that Hydrox came first. That's fine. I'm not disputing who came first. I'm just disputing quality, okay? That's all I'm disputing here. So I take out this bag of Hydrox cookies. These things could survive any natural disaster. They really could. It doesn't actually take on liquid. It just sits there. And so I'm sitting here kind of a little sad about the cookies I have, and then I look across the table. And this kid pulls out this entire sleeve of Oreo cookies. And it probably didn't go down this way, but this is how I remember it. Is he did it with just this, look what I have. And he slowly ate them in slow motion. And I remember this anger just welling up inside me to the point where I went home and I had a very serious discussion with my parents over dinner. Randy, Billy, because it's first name. Now I'm really upset. Because it was time to seek justice over this, right? This wrongdoing, it wasn't fair. And I pleaded my case about how terrible this was. And they looked at me as if I was crazy. And after all of my explanation, I remember my father with all the love in the world, looked at me and said, life's not fair. Ooh, I hated that. How many of you all have said that in this room? Come on. Yeah, most of you. And you've had it said to you. Okay? That's why it's just history repeating itself over and over again. But is that actually the truth? It is. You see, what we have to understand is, church, we live in a broken world, don't we? It's a corrupt world. It's full of sin. It's full of people that are imperfect and messy. But like we talked about a few months ago, when it comes to God, there's always an ellipses, right? There's always a ... You see, yes, life isn't fair. It wasn't fair that Paul was still in prison, wasn't it? It wasn't fair that these guys kept trying to get him killed. It wasn't right. You see, there was no justice happening in this situation. It was completely and utterly not fair. See, but what we learned is Paul wasn't about to get lost and unfair. His focus was on a promise. So remember, during this whole time, Paul had a promise. And Paul's promise was from the Lord that he was destined to go and preach where? Rome. Okay, so he had a promise. He knew where he was supposed to go. He knew where he would end up. He had experienced God's providence, his protection in the past. So why would that change in this situation? Friends, it's not fair that an innocent man is being tried. It's not. It's also not fair that corrupt people get to make really bad decisions. It's not fair that there are people that have to sleep on the street. It's not fair that there are single moms who are trying to figure out how in the world am I going to put food on the table for my kids. It's not fair that there are men, women, and children every single day that get caught up in human trafficking. It's not fair that there are people all over this planet who don't have their very basic human needs met. Church, it is not fair. But God has given us the ability and the call to do something, to speak up, to take action. You know, we could talk about injustice. We can talk about all these things that are happening. But we should also take a look of what it means to actually take action and to hold tight to God's promises along the way. Lamentations 3:19 through 23, I love this cry. It says, remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it, and it's bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercy never comes to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. Just think about that for a second. Think about how that feels. We see two different messages there in that verse, right? We hear this cry. We hear this, remember my affliction and my wanderings. In other verses it says, I can actually feel the poison. This poison of injustice. Yet I also understand this, there is hope. there is hope. What I love about the book of Acts, though, is that the Lord shows us a few really cool things. And one is this collision between peace and action, trust and justice. These two things that are happening over and over. We get to see this example where yes, you know what? Life isn't fair, but I can actually do some things about it. I have been given sometimes this ability and authority to take action and do things and appeal and care for others and love for others. I can do this because I have a promise. I have a promise of the gospel. But I also have a calling from the Lord who's called me to just not sit still, but to go and do something about it. Let's continue reading verse 6. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he'd arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense. Hold tight to that thought. Paul argued in his defense. Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Those three things, by the way, those are terrible crimes, all punishable by death. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem there and be tried on these charges before me?" Something's changed. But Paul said, "I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death." So Paul now finds himself on trial again for like the 4th time, in front of the same crew who tried to have him murdered a few years back. These guys aren't going away. And honestly, did they have anything new to say? No, the charges were the same. They had zero new evidence. They had no legs to stand on, yet they kept getting an ear. Their case was weak, however, their desire to take out Paul and his controversial message of the gospel was fierce. Paul again argues his innocence before this desperate group, and now there's this new governor with a new ear. And Festus, now being politically savvy, did you just see him change his mind right there? Let's go to Jerusalem. Do you want him to be tried there? Do you think this would end well for Paul? Paul knew that. It would not end well for him. If they decided to send him to Jerusalem, do you think he'd make it there? Absolutely not. Paul knew if they released him to Jerusalem, he was going to die. He was going to get killed. And even if by some miracle he were to make it to Jerusalem, do you think he'd get a fair trial? Not a chance. But God. Paul trusted God's plan. He trusted God's providence. He trusted all of those things, but something changes in Paul, because guess what? Enough is enough. This ends now. I'm not going to just sit back, and I'm just not going to let you guys say these things. I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to do something about it. Yes, he trusted in God's promise. He trusted in his providence. He trusted in God's protection. He knew that God was going to work out all the details. But he also knew that God gave him the ability to stand up for good and right and fair things. He wasn't going to just sit back any longer and do nothing. So another lesson that we can take away from Paul is that we can defend ourselves against evil things. Church, do you realize that? We can defend ourselves against evil things. Now I know, hold on a second. Some of you may say, well, but the Bible's full of things that say, the battle's not ours, it's God's. That I shouldn't get caught up in defending myself and arguing my case. But Matthew 5:38-39 says, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. Is the battle ours? No. Who owns the ultimate battle? God. But does that mean we're not supposed to participate? Does that mean we're not called to take action, to do something, to fight alongside him, to do something? Because I still sometimes think we walk this line of be still means stand still. You see, in this passage, Jesus isn't taking away our right to defend ourselves. He's not taking our right to defend others. He's not saying that we can't want or ask for justice. What he's saying here in this passage about turning the other cheek, he's talking about vengeance, of retaliation. But he's not saying just accept it. See, Jesus' command to turn the other cheek is simply a command to forego retaliation and revenge, of judgment. That's God's. He can have that. See, he was not setting government regulations or foreign policy here. That's not what he was trying to do. He's not tossing aside the judicial system. Crimes can still be prosecuted. People can still protest if they want to. But the followers of Christ need not take revenge. That's what he's talking about. But that's not saying we don't stand up for what's right. Paul was claiming he's innocent. He was standing up for the right thing. Yes, we shouldn't seek vengeance when unfair circumstances come our way, but we can seek justice. We can stand up for right things. We can speak up for ourselves when we've been wronged. We can plead on the behalf of others who are broken and who are hurting. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. You see, Paul understood that, yes, there are moments to be silent. There are moments to wait and to have faith. But there are also moments, church, moments when we must stand up and defend ourselves, to stand up and defend others, to stand up against sin, to stand up against abuse, to stand up against people who are hurting, to be a voice for those who feel like they don't have one. We are trusting and believing that, yes, we know God's providence. We believe in his salvation, but we also know that he believed for us to go and share that with other people and love other people. And sometimes that means drawing a line into the sand and saying, no, this isn't okay. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to endure this. And I'm not going to sit silently anymore and watch it happen. Acts 25, verses 11 and 12. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I love this part. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when we had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. This part is so awesome. It is so awesome because this is Paul's drop the mic moment. Literally drop the mic moment. You see, so you're going to go ahead. Okay, so this is Paul. You're going to go ahead and you're going to put me in harm's way. You know I've done nothing. You're a smart man. So was the guy before you. You both knew I didn't do anything. You're going to hand me over to these guys who you know are going to kill me. They want me dead. You're really going to do that? Fine. I appeal to Caesar. Drop the mic, walk away. Do you realize that he had that authority? As a Roman citizen, he could appeal to Caesar. But what's crazy is he could do that at any moment. Everything we've been reading about in Acts, at any moment, all he had to do was say those words, I appeal to Caesar, and it would be over. He'd be headed to Rome as God promised. Yet for a lot of that time, he stayed silent. He endured. He used that time to preach the gospel to people who needed it. As he sat in prison with people that actually did things, to love them, to care for them, to spend time with people that didn't look like him, that didn't believe like him, that may have hated him. that didn't stop him from fulfilling the call of Christ to take action and do something. Let's look at that word appeal for a second. If you were to look at that from a law definition, it means to appeal to a higher court, to appeal to someone of higher authority, because maybe a lower court failed to take action or didn't do or have the outcome that you wanted. But then you look at the general definition of to appeal, and it's to bring up a serious or urgent request. Now, there's something important to understand here, though, that even though Paul appealed to Caesar, he was never believed for once that Caesar was his salvation. He never once thought that Caesar was going to actually save his life. In fact, he just accepted the pragmatic reality that a government beyond his control was out there, and that he was just going to trust God to take care of the circumstances. But the only thing he knew he could do was hold tight to the promise that he was supposed to go to Rome. And if he was going to be set up to die, I'm going to stand up and ensure that I go there, because that's where God told me I was going. You see, when Paul said, I appeal to Caesar, he wasn't saying Caesar is Lord. And that was common in that time. You would hear citizens, you would hear Roman guards say Caesar's Lord. That's not what he's saying. He was just appealing to a higher court. Paul knew that the person he was appealing to, when he said, I appeal to Caesar, Nero was a bad guy. He was a terrible guy. This guy that he just appealed to killed Christians in the blink of an eye. If you came to him on a really bad day, you're out. And you just appealed to him? Was Paul worried about the outcome? Nope. I know I'm supposed to go to Rome. Today is a really great day to go and do that, I guess. Let's start that process. But here's what I'm going to do on the way. I'm going to be extremely dangerous for the gospel. I'm going to stand up for what's right. I'm not going to let you hold me back. I'm not going to let you just sit there and continue to tell me and try to kill me and try to kill the message. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say something. Church, there's a pivotal lesson. It's a critical lesson that I think we have to learn here from Paul. And it's that we can't ignore injustice. We cannot ignore injustice. You see, I experienced this with my 5-year-old actually last night. He legitimately, I watched him take this food and dump it over because he didn't want it. And he kind of looked at me in the eye while he did it too. Like, what now? And there's a rage kind of that happens as parents. You try to keep cool, calm, and collected, but you're like, okay, this is on. And immediately I said, do you think you're supposed to do that? And he does this. He turns himself in the corner and he covers his eyes. I'm not looking back. I know what just happened over there. You're mad at me. There's bad things over there that I did. You know what's funny about that? Is we do that. We do that to the things happening around us. You know, if I turn away, if I don't think about it, it won't bother me. If I turn around and if I turn the other cheek and not peek, I don't have to see that there are people that are being crushed by sin. I don't have to see that there are people that are suffering around this planet, that are suffering right outside these church walls. You see, the Bible talks about 2 types of justice. There's retributive justice and restorative justice. Retributive justice says you steal or you do wrong and you go to jail, right? You get the consequence for that. And there's a due place for that. There absolutely is. That's why we have a judicial system to do that. But guess what? That's ran by flawed people. But the Bible talks a lot about restorative justice, which is this idea of, yes, there's justice, but that justice also means being with people, loving them, going to where they're at, helping those who have been taken advantage of, righting injustice, advocating on their behalf of others. It's restoring people. Isn't that the business that God's involved in? Restoration. See, Jesus dedicated his short life here on earth to spend time with these people, to care for others. Look through who Jesus spent time with. There were people that didn't look like him. They didn't believe like him. They were people that others wouldn't even dare being seen in public with. That's who Jesus spent time with. He loved them, and he cared for them, and he was fiercely protective of them. Church, we just had an example set before us. Because he didn't just dedicate his life for them. He died for them. He gave his life so they didn't have to live in that anymore. He died for the ones that we don't agree with. He died for the ones that don't look like us and believe like us and share the same worldview as us. He died for those people too. Proverbs 31, 8 through 9 says, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy." Church, we have to start having more conversations about what our lives, about what our church, our communities might look like when we, as a body of really messy, imperfect people, start to appeal on the behalf of ourselves and others. I remember a moment when I worked at a radiology company, and I was in the thick of an absolute, utter depression. And I know my wife is here right there, and she can attest to it. It was just bad. And I remember hiding away at work in this place where patients would come and we'd bring them to get changed. And I hid, and I drew the curtain, but apparently not enough. And I sat on the ground, and I was just weeping. And I'm talking ugly cry. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just ugly crying. And I watched all these people pass by. I had a few people open the curtain and go, "Oh," and then they kept going. Until a radiologist saw me and heard me crying, opened the curtain, didn't just stand there and looked at me, but he got down and he sat on the floor right next to me. He put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." He didn't say anything else because he didn't have to. That's who we are going to be, church. That is who we have to be for other people. That a church that stands up for others, that does life with people. See, what might happen when we begin to speak up for the truth of the gospel, to stand up when others are being attacked, to fight for truth, to challenge when we need to challenge, to defend against those who are bringing harm to other people. That we are not going to be a church that hides our face away, but we're going to come charging in. Not because we have it all together, but we're coming with the power of Jesus, with the call of him to come and love and care. We're not the ones who does the rescuing, but God sure likes to use his people to do and help. But he just needs us to stand up and say enough is enough. We have a responsibility. Like Paul, we have a responsibility as Christians to help those who are suffering, who are in harm's way, who are lost, who are being crushed under the weight of their own sin. God has called us to be present in their suffering, to be willing to get down on the ground and sit next to broken people, and to say, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Galatians 6:2, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." I believe that we are a church. I believe we are a church that is safe for people to appeal. But I do feel like all of us, all churches, all people have some room to grow, to get better. to make this a place where people can come as they are, hurting, imperfect, messy, broken, harmed people. You see, people in danger, if you look back in the history books, people in danger would run, and I mean run, into a church building, desperate. They would run into a church building, and they would run into a room just like this and hold their hands up and claim sanctuary. They would claim sanctuary. They claimed safety and refuge. Man, what if we were a church where people just did that? What if we did more and more life with people like that? You see, what I've realized in my own life is that when I gave my life to the Lord, I think I expected something a little different. Maybe I watched too many movies, but when I gave my life to the Lord, I kind of waited for something to happen. I didn't know if I wanted a beam of light to come and maybe, something like that. You guys didn't know I could sing, did you? You know what happened when I gave my life to Christ? Things hurt more. I had to deal with stuff. I wrestled. I had questions. Oh man, I fought him. I fought. But there was something different. I wasn't alone. I had help. I had courage. I may have been broken, but I wasn't crushed. Lifehouse, I can't stand up here without pleading a little bit, so just bear with me. And I think maybe it's because of stuff that I've suffered or hearing the stories of people in this room that I know have had this. But I want to take this opportunity to make it very clear that if there is anyone in this room who may be silently and secretly suffering, if we know people who are silently and secretly suffering hurt, suffering injustice, there's just a couple things I want to tell you. And the first is that you are loved. Do you realize that? I know we shake our head and we talk about it all the time, but do you realize how fiercely you're loved? That Jesus sent his son, yes, to die for you, but also to be with you, to go through that process of healing. And some of you right now and others we know around us are silently suffering. Can I ask you a favor? Can you just say something? Appeal. Challenge. Ask for help. Because the fact is that God wants you to be heard, but we want you to be heard. Because we're not going to be a place that just is a place where people can just meet Jesus. We're going to be a place where you can actually do life with them, where we actually do life with you, the good, the bad, the ugly. We as your church family want to help you. And so I also want to ask this, is that if you're afraid to go home, or if you're afraid of someone who is going to come home, say something. Appeal. Let us be a place to help go and find the right resources to get you the help that you need. And let us love you through it. Or maybe it's not abuse. Maybe you are the ones who are suffering with anxiety and depression, which I will tell you is absolutely crippling. And you're suffering silently right now. Or you may love someone who you know is going through that. Let me ask you and plead with you and appeal on your behalf. Say something. Get angry like Paul did and argue on your behalf. I need help. And then remember this truth. Just like Paul was, you are loved and you are absolutely not alone. Do not leave here today without saying something. Yeah, we have people in yellow lanyards that want to pray with you, but you also have human beings standing around you right now, sitting around you. Ask for help. Because I want us to be the church that helps. I want us to be the church that runs into the battle and says, Lifehouse is here, I'm here, we're here. We're going to get involved, we're going to do something, we're going to fight for you, we're going to fight with you, and we're going to love you through it. That's who we want to be. Because I believe that's the core of who we are. And how awesome is it? How awesome is it that we get to be a part of it? That we get to do something. That we get to act. You see, when Jesus was in this world, he suffered injustice. He was beaten, right? Was he cursed? Was he mocked? Was he abused? Yeah. Was he falsely accused? But here's the thing is that Jesus had nobody here on earth, that he could appeal to. So he appealed to a higher court. Church, whatever you need, wherever you are, let us be a church that appeals for ourselves and appeals for those who need help and who need Jesus. Amen? Let's pray. Father, I'd be amiss to say that this is an area where I need to be better, Lord, and I ask your forgiveness for the moments that I have turned the other cheek for the wrong reason, Lord. Lord, that I would be more like my daughter, that when we're driving by and she sees anybody on the street, her heart aches. It aches. Lord, I want my heart to ache more for hurting people. I want my eyes to be open more, Lord. Father, use us. Use this place, Lord, to love people. To love people that don't look like us. To love people that don't believe like us. Love people that we wouldn't normally think or feel comfortable to love. Give us the courage to be that, to love like that. Lord, for those of us in this room, for those of us in this community, for those of us who have people close to us, Lord, that are in harm's way, whether it be abuse, whether it be anxiety and depression, whatever that is, Lord, I pray that they would appeal to you. I pray, Lord, that they would cry out, that they would seek restoration. And Lord, I pray, Father, that as we continue to grow as a church, that we would continue to be dedicated to loving people not just here, but those who may never feel like they can walk into this building, Lord. Lord, we love you.